This morning is our conclusion of our series of going through pieces and events that are taking place in relation to the understanding last day events, as well as the pieces of questions about Sunday laws and so forth. So now today we're going to pick up on the question of Project 2025. And you've heard it before, but there's some different pieces I want to share today. And the question really is, well, what is it? Because there are a lot of people who are very much concerned and in arms, and they are like wringing their hands almost literally because they think the Project 2025 is like the mark of the beast or a precursor. And it's important to be able to distinguish and to share again that in whatever we talk about, I want to encourage you always to go back and to study for yourself, to look up for yourself. Because the conclusions so forth that I might come to may be different from the conclusions that you might come to. And so the opportunity of being able to study is just such that it gives us the chance of being able to go back and to see. And of course, in the going back and looking and examining, if you happen to come to maybe a different conclusion than that which I have come to, share. I would love to be able to hear and to be able to challenge us collectively on that and prayerfully so that we may be able to grow. Well, one thing, of course, that I do want to highlight is that when we look at a topic as this, we want to avoid sensationalism and the sensational aspects and trappings. We will always want to look to see, well, at face value, what is it and what is this piece saying, what's going on? People watch the news and they see blurbs of things and and I'm concerned, at least in the aspect of within the culture of the church, that they see events and they are trying to like place one as though, all right, this event, if I can take this and put it over here and this, and they'll say that all these different things are happening, you just can't see it. But if you take this and you put this and you put this and put this together, and then you can put it together and you have like a whole picture of everything that is happening. And I fear for that, in that if you take a bunch of isolated instances and put them together, you can create almost any narrative that you want to. It's just not the way to understand current events, not the way to understand history, is not the way to live life. You're just picking a piece that's over here. Because if you do that, then the chances are that you'll come to the wrong conclusion or you'll interpret things incorrectly. Of it, the same would be true that if you just said, well, look, here I'm going to show you a picture of a police car driving down the street. And I took that picture of a police car driving down the street. And then I came back and showed you a picture of maybe reporters on another street. And I came and showed you a picture of a helicopter flying over. I could put all those things together and say, well, look, the reason why the police officers here and the helicopter and the reporters here, and they're planning on doing like a raid on this particular area and so forth. Now, that might sound feasible and plausible, because I put these three pieces of evidence together. But the only way to be able to really understand what's happening is we would have to know, well, where is that police car going to? Where is the helicopter flying to? What are the reporters there for? And if they're isolated pieces and so forth, but I've combined them together to be able to make one kind of like a Frankenstein experience, then we'll come to the wrong conclusion. And unfortunately, that is a lot that is taking place in the searching of the scriptures and studies, and people who are positioning themselves as being experts or spokespersons for end of the world scenarios or final event scenarios, is just taking pieces together and putting it together and ultimately coming to the wrong conclusion. So how do we avoid doing that? Again, the way that we can avoid doing that, it primarily is look at every situation for itself. Test it out, evaluate it, kick the tires. Does it stand on its own? If it's an isolated event that is here, again, that is not the case. And so people would do that. They will say, well, look, President Trump, he is about to do a Sunday law. And of course, you can just put in whatever president you want. And you say, well, why do you say that? The reason why I say that is because he signed this. And if you add that with that, and you put that with this, it all comes together, and that's what it spells. That is not the way Bible prophecy works. It's not the way that we should study Scripture. In fact, when Jesus talked about in Matthew 24, He specifically, like when you talked about the signs, he said that these are certain signs and events that would take place that were surrounding the destruction of Jerusalem. So that if there was an army that had come on the outside of Jerusalem prior to 70 AD, which it eventually would be destroyed, but it did not have the, quote, pagan banners as such that were identified, of course, from, we're talking about Romanism, paganism, that would not have been a fulfillment of prophecy. And so if an isolated event happens, again, it has to be looked at within its context, the broader context, to be able to see, well, what is its impact and meaning? Now, that said, we can also understand and know that there is a shift and a push that has been in America before and even today to seek to bring America back to its moral foundation, to its fabric. And there are many people who are very conscientious Christians who believe that America is a Christian nation and that it has moved itself away from its source of Christianity. And as a result, we can see all the different things that are happening in society today. We see crime, we can see abortion, we see murder and theft, debauchery, stealing, killing. All of these different things continue to intensify. And as a result of those things intensifying, the individuals say, well, it is because our nation is bereft of God. And the only solution to many then is not crime or not being tough on crime, but being to go back to God, as a nation, that the nation would seek back to go back to its Christian foundation and Christian roots. Amongst many evangelicals, the supposition is there that we need to be able to take over the government because the government is really an extension of the church. And the church should be able to have its laws carried out through the purview and through the lens of the government. Because if it's Christians, then Christians should rule by Christian laws. And I would again push back against that because we would say, by and large, those who are Christian, people would say, well, it's fine if you're Christian, but what about if someone said, well, let's rule by Sharia law, like Muslim law. Let's rule by a different law that is non-Christian but is religious in nature. Right? So whether it's something in terms of Buddhism or Confucianism or Shintoism, people would push back against that because they say, no, that is not Christian. We are a Christian society, a Christian nation. And because we're a Christian nation, then we ought to have Christian laws. And again, I will draw the line because separation of church and state doesn't mean that the state has, quote, Christian laws. There's nothing wrong with having good laws, nothing wrong with having moral laws, nothing wrong with having just laws. We should have those. But to suggest that the nation should have, quote, Christian laws, as again, is a far reach, it's an overreach. So the church is on one side, the state is on the other side. Again, I draw witness to what Jesus said. He said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and render to God the things that are God's. If ever we are trying to influence and bring in Christian virtues, that is fine, quote unquote, as long as those Christian virtues and the law that is espoused is something that you adhere to. But if you don't adhere to it, then that immediately puts you on the outs. All right, and because it puts you on the outs, then that means then that your rights are not going to be protected because your rights are in the minority. And the framework of the Constitution in the Bill of Rights is to protect the rights of the minority. So that you can't just go by majority rules, and it is typically true that majority rules, but it is not to the detriment of the minority though. Meaning everyone has a place. And so even though you may not be the main person in power, you must still be treated with respect, dignity, honor, and so forth. And so your rights must be protected and preserved. That said, how does that relate to Project 2025? If you hear of it and you examine it, you'll find that there are some pieces there that you may very well be able to say, I agree with. And you may read some pieces that you may say, I disagree with it. Well, on a high-level overview, what is Project 2025 and what is its significance and such? This mandate is not the first mandate for leadership. It's something, again, that is designed from a conservative point of view. And by conservative, individuals align themselves in saying, well, you are liberal, you are conservative, and you also hear a term like progressive. Okay? And so liberal meaning that the term, just from a political perspective, is suggesting then that you are free in your principles and so forth. And so you're okay with same-sex marriage. You're okay with abortion rights. You're okay with women's rights in terms of reproductive rights and so forth. And maybe the other pieces will go along with like a liberal agenda. And so it might be that you want to have broad government and broad government overreach and so forth, and you are into a lot of various social programs and so forth, all right? So that may be looked at, quote unquote, as being liberal. Then you have on the other side being conservative, and the conservative, of course, would be just the opposite of being liberal, right? And so conservative would be that you are not in favor of women's rights, you're not in favor of abortion, you're not in favor of same-sex marriages, you may be a strong advocate of the Second Amendment and so forth. And again, because you espouse one or two of those things doesn't necessarily make a person a conservative or make a person a liberal, but for our purposes, it's all kind of lumped together in one segment is how people really would define liberal versus conservative. Then, of course, your progressive would be people who are willing to move towards the center on either side. So you may have a progressive conservative or a progressive liberal, and that's kind of like, okay, you're moving towards the center, you view that there could be some accommodation as such. Now, when we talk about political parties, then people would then take those same labels, liberal and conservative, and apply them to Democrats and to Republicans. Democrat being, quote, liberal, and conservative being, quote, conservative as such. And so that's like the mantra that is there. Well, and understand Project 2025, we can't look solely at 2025 because that was, again, the presidency was, we voted in 2024, and the president would take over and the new administration would take over in the year 2025. So the emphasis is there, well, what can happen in 2025? Not so much the, quote unquote, the full year, but you'll see the significance of maybe the title as such in just a moment. This is not the first mandate that has been put out. You can go back to the 80s, and the 80s was the first one that was put out during the time when Ronald Reagan came into the White House. So inspired by the 1980 mandate was Ronald Reagan that he gave it to the members of Congress. It was a Republican-controlled Congress. So it's not something that is new, although a lot of people try to jump on it like it's something new. It's been there for a while. And the idea of it is that we want to have a book of reference, if you please, or literally a mandate as it is, of how we should be able to move in office and what we should try to change. And that again goes back to the piece that these are conservatives who feel that America has been hijacked by liberals who have a hell-bent design and purpose to carry us contrary to the teachings of Scripture, because they believe America is a Judeo-Christian society founded upon those principles, and we've drifted far away. So we need to bring America back to those Judeo-principle Christian principles. Now, there are four pillars that I want to quickly address, and the four pillars are as follows. There's a policy agenda, and the policy agenda, of course, is to suggest, again, the various pieces that would be provided on major issues. And so this is how we want you to govern, to legislate in these areas, that we can make sure that these areas are covered. So we will make sure that these areas are covered in terms of policy. And if they are covered in our policy, then we're going to be able to execute the way that we would so desire. The second piece is then dealing with the personal database, and that's to be able to have a system of collecting individuals who are similar in thought and in principle and ideology, so that the administration is able to look and to plug in different people and so forth who might be able to fulfill a various parts, so that we have the right people in place. Now, this goes back to the 7M theology, and the 7 M's were like in the book of Revelation talks about the woman sits on these 7 mountains, and the 7 mountains are identified through conservative or evangelical lens as like the media, like the government, the educational system, and so forth. So they feel that in order to be able to counter the working of this beast power, you have to take over these systems that influence so many specters of life. And so you a lot of times hear about the pushback against, quote, Hollywood. You push back against like the leftist elite and so forth. And so it's like we have to take over all these things in order to be able to bring about a Christian agenda. And so having a database is important because you're able to know who to tap in to fill in like the next piece. And if you study or you pay attention to anything in terms of politics, you know that in the courts, that one of the big things, of course, is that the president is able to appoint people to the bench. And it's important then, if you are appointing people to the bench, that you will want to have a person who will share some of the same ideological points of view that you do. Hence, you'll find the conflict that is there with Supreme Court justices, that whoever the president is, they want to be able to select a person. And they never pick someone, at least they have not historically, picked someone from the other party. You don't find a Democratic president saying, okay, I'm going to nominate a Republican for Supreme Court justice, or vice versa. And the reason being is because they want to have someone who maybe ideologically, while they're not Democrat or Republican per se, they have had court rulings that are in line with what their understanding is in terms of the policies and practice and law. So a database will be able to pick out those individuals and to appoint them there. Then, of course, you have the Presidential Administration Academy, which is an online educational system to be able to train future political appointees and just equipping them so that they're able to follow through on various appointments, and that they're well trained, of course, in this perspective. And then the last piece, like the catalyst to it, is that is a 180-day playbook. Hence, again, we go back to 2025. That in the first 180 days, that this is a playbook to get into office and to be able to execute on, to ensure that there is a swift change in policy and to make it as quickly as possible. Now, the question you might then ask, well, then who's behind this? And there are, it's a think tank that is written, the Heritage Foundation is a conservative think tank, and so it's a group of minds of people who come together and they share on different things, views, points of view on immigration, on education reform, on finance, bureaucracy, and so forth. But there are four pillars, or four persons that we'll highlight. One is Paul Dans, then Kevin Roberts, Russ Vaught, and then Jonathan Berry. Now, we'll talk about the latter in just a moment. Jonathan Berry, as such, who is the current Solicitor General for the Department of Labor. Well, these four individuals are more or less are looked at as being like the key proponents of Project 2025. And so that while it's written by a number of different people, these are like the people who are at the forefront, who had a lot of input and say in that. And they are very conservative in their views. And again, their viewpoint is that we want to make America a Christian nation. So they are unapologetic about that. They will state again that is our purpose, is to make America a religious nation. We want to defend America in such. And so we want to do so. They found that one of the quickest ways is that we can shape government by the executive branch. And it's a lot easier from the executive branch in that is only one person who is in the, quote, the charge of the executive branch. That's the president. And then the vice president. And so when the president would have a tremendous amount of power to be able to wield and to shape and to impact the executive branch of government, primarily through executive orders, they're able to do things there to be able to shape. So that was the plan. So, hey, take advantage of what is there within your scope to shape these things so that we can have a more Christian nation. Now, some of the controversial elements of the Project 2025, if you look at it, some of the pieces you've seen play out in the news. One is to reinstate Schedule F to replace career officials with political appointees. And you saw a number of people who lost their jobs, right? And so the courts have determining whether or not this was illegal. Because again, an executive order, you're able to do something. It's just a directive to the executive branch of the government. It's not a law, it is a directive. And with that directive, it can be suspended, it can be overturned. Like the courts can say, well, you don't have the authority to be able to do that, so we're going to overturn it. And of course, that's not done just by the courts just saying we want to do something. It would be done by a lawsuit being brought about, by somebody saying that this is illegal, and this is why it is illegal and why we want it overturned. And of course, the courts might rule on it and say, no, it is within the purview of the president to be able to do such things. Of course, a later president can come in and can undo what his predecessor or her predecessor has done by, again, the stroke of an executive order. But these are some of the components. And then other piece, of course, you saw or read about is a mass deportation and strict immigration policies. And that is still continuing to play out. Not as much in the forefront of the news, but still a significant piece. And part of this is that the mind frame of many of the proponents of Project 2025 is that Democrats have, quote, opened up the gates to allow the country to be taken over by people who have a non-Christian agenda. So in order to be able to fix that, you have to shut the immigration policy or check it so that you can curtail those who are trying to come in and to make America less Christian. Now you have the, quote, church view on that, and the church view, when I say it in terms of like a conspiratorial piece, is that people would say, well, the Catholic version is that it is opened up to bring in many who are Catholic so that it will make America a Catholic nation. And therefore, that is why immigration has changed. The other piece, the fourth piece highlighted, is there are restrictions on abortion funding and on LGBTQ plus rights. And so those are some of the elements in there that you will find that I've listed as maybe being most controversial as such. So that's kind of the piece of Project 2025 in a high-level overview. But in it, though, there is a page that speaks in reference to Sunday rest or Sabbath rest. And that's a piece that I want to focus in on briefly. This is on page 589, and again, you have different pieces that are pulled up. And so I'm going to read it to you from page 589, and this is a piece that you will come across, and you might hear people who present and share and talk and so forth. And yet, as I say, text without context is pretext for subtext. So it's important to be able to look at the whole context to be able to understand. So we have a framework of what Project 2025 is. It's like a 180-day playbook that's written by conservatives of how to have a blueprint to be able to bring conservatism back into America. And we can do this through politics, and here's how we can do it through politics: by the expression of executive orders, okay? Then we want to have a pipeline of conservative who also will follow through. And of course, then that's when you start looking at some groups and so forth, like Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA, and so forth. Like, okay, we want to get the next generation that they will be conservative and have these same principles and values and so forth to be able to carry through. So it's like going after the next generation to be able to follow through on that. And so, of course, not just that organization, but other organizations, again, will follow in that same piece just to be able to bolster it. Now, page 589. In fact, before I read 589, let me just say one other piece, because since it is related to Sabbath, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, his book came out posthumously, Stop in the Name of God. Now, there are many conspiracies and so forth that people throw out, but the reality of it is that his life was tragically taken and cut short by a deranged gunman. This was not by the, quote, any other power other than a person who was sick. It's the same as like another sick person would start to take President Trump's life. Or another sick person may have gone to attack various Democratic lawmakers. It's sad that you have a climate that people feel that because I disagree with you either politically or from a religious perspective, that I will resort to violence to make a point. And that is unfortunate and it's tragic, but it's indicative of the times in which we live, that a person feels that I hate what you're saying so much that I will take your life to be able to silence you. And that is horrendous, whether it's someone, quote, on the right, whether it's someone, quote, on the left. It's just sickening as a society that is the place that we have sunk to. One of the places, of course, that Charlie Kirk stated in his book, he was to come forth, and there are some who are in the Adventist circle who are, again, quick into conspiracies and such, and they say, well, look, he was killed by the Roman Catholics. They didn't want him to talk about the Sabbath. No, stop it. He was not. I've just explained who he was assassinated by. Now, if we follow the logic through that it was from, quote, it was the Jesuits who wanted him to be silenced, then we have a couple of problems, right? Because his assassination created a greater interest in what he was doing and the book that will come out posthumously, right? So, like, okay, you, instead of silencing something, you've just like thrown fuel on the fire. And people will want to look at it. Now, if you look at his book, he is not advocating, quote unquote, Sabbath observance in terms of what Seventh-day Adventists or Seventh-day Baptists or whether other Sabbatarian groups would keep in terms of like Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. what he's advocating for, and though, yes, he understood the seventh-day Sabbath, he received and understood that from a rabbi, but his understanding or his experience was, in terms of practically relating, was that it was important to be able to have a Sabbath. It was important to be able to have a time to be able to unplug and recharge from this wears and the cares and the tears of life. So while he did, quote, observe sometimes the seventh day Sabbath, he stated that he would observe any time, right? So it could be Saturday, it could be Sunday. It was just the point of, out of 7 days, you need to stop and have one. So let's not conflate the issue as to this is promoting explicitly one day, because it is not. It is promoting the idea that man needs rest, okay? And it's true, man does need rest. However, within the context of Scripture, Exodus and Genesis is foreshadowing, or speaking rather, of a specific time of rest, i.e. Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. Now that logic also, that it was an attempt by the Jesuits to cover up, it doesn't hold true as well when you consider Chaplain Barry Black has been the chaplain of the U.S. Senate for well over 2 decades. And Chaplain Black, of course, if you're familiar, he'll be Seventh-day Adventist. Then you would look at other people like Ben Carson and so forth, who talked about Sabbath and so forth. So that is not an issue that is there. So don't get into the conspiracy that people will peddle and will push. Stick with the facts. So on page 589, this is what the document says, going back to Project 2025. It says this. It says, God ordained the Sabbath, and I'm not putting this in parentheses. It's in the book. He ordained Sabbath or Sunday as a day of rest. And again, that's important to be able to distinguish, because to many evangelicals, they just see Sabbath as Sunday. It's literally like when they see Sabbath, they see Sunday. It's a reference to Sunday, not upon the first day or so forth, or the sixth day or the seventh day. It's simply a day of rest is really how it is accounted. Not so much the number doesn't really mean anything. It's just the concept that Sabbath means Sunday. It means a day of rest. Because Shabbat does mean rest. It doesn't mean like seventh day is referring to rest. So God ordained the Sabbath Sunday as a day of rest, and until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral and legal regulation of work on that day. So they're drawing back then to history and saying that, look, it's just like a Johnny-come-lately that Sunday has not been honored in terms of its laws by moral and legal regulation. We've had it for a while, but it has gone away. And that would be true. That was true up until like the 1930s, 40s, and so forth. You had mandates and so forth for religious, for secular, for shops and so forth to be closed on Sunday. That was held valid. It was not until like the 20s and so forth that that the courts came in and began to like rule that Sunday laws and so forth were unconstitutional. Now you still have them there, and places are still closed, but the reason why is not because of religious observance. But they're stating again a fact, but sort of not with all the details. So yes, you had those moral and legal regulations of work on that day. Okay. Then their point is that they want to encourage communal rest of the community or the society by amending the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, to require that workers be paid time and a half for hours worked on the Sabbath. All right, so the piece of it is, of course, is that they want for the Sunday to be honored then as a day of rest, okay? And the component, of course, that is devoted there is that they want laborers to be paid for overtime for working on Sunday. So reading that, I want to emphasize that is not a Sunday law. It's not a Sunday law for a couple of different reasons. One, it is not a law. Right? Two, it is a recommendation. And three, if it would come forth, it would be like part of an executive order. And four, it is not even honoring, specifically setting up Sunday. Five, it is there is no catalyst, or there's no law there or a fine or penalty for Sunday in place of. In its full context, this is what it says. It says that Congress should encourage communal rest by amending the Fair Labor Standards Act to require that workers be paid for time and a half for hours worked on the Sabbath. And of course, by this Sabbath, they're particularly talking about Sunday. That day would default to Sunday, except for employers with a sincere religious observance of a Sabbath at a different time. In general, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. So they are not explicitly exalting one day above another. They're stating that we want a Sabbath rest. Like, you can pick whatever. We will pick Sunday. But if you have another Sabbath, that's fine. In particular, again, these are not my words, these are their words. In general, that day would default to Sunday, except for employers with a sincere religious observance of a Sabbath at a different time. So if you felt it was Friday was your holy time, then that's fine. If you felt Thursday was your holy time, then that is fine. Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. The obligation would transfer to that period instead. Houses of worship, to the limited extent that they may have FLSA covered employees and employers legally required to operate around the clock, would be exempt, as would workers otherwise exempt from overtime. Now, one could argue then that you can be using the threat of overtime to stymie people, to cause them to, to coerce them to the right conclusion. And that would be a fair argument. But then the other part of that would also be true then, that if you're running a business, you're going to look to see, well, what is the bottom line? Are you still able to make a profit while being able to give time and a half? And if so, then we're going to keep doing it. If you're not able to make a profit on it, then certainly then you're not going to do so. So it would achieve that effect. But the effect is ultimately here that they're not prescribing Sunday over Sabbath. The effect is they're prescribing we need to have worship being brought in as a part of the communal state of man. Okay? And I think that's important to consider. This is from same Jonathan Berry, who's an architect at Project 2025, who's a current solicitor for the Department of Labor. This is what he says in reference to Sunday labors and working on Sabbath and so forth. He says, it is possible that society could spontaneously address this need for communal rest without state intervention. All right, so he's stating that there's a need for rest, communal rest. When we talk about communal rest, is saying like rest to stop and to be able to worship on Sabbath. Now again, to them, you need a rest, okay? Whether it's Sabbath, whether it's Sunday, you just need rest. You can't just keep working over and over incessantly. There has to be rest. Now he says that it's possible that we could stop on our own without state intervention. Now notice that he said, like it's possible that we could have traffic safety without mandates to drive on the right side of the road. Possible, but not plausible. Or what he is indirectly saying is that, look, people should have enough chutzpah and common sense to stop and to take a day off. And people are intelligent enough to be able to do that, but they won't do it unless they have state intervention. So if the state does not come in and say, you must have this day off, you must take this day off for worship or rest, you will not do it. That's interesting, especially when you consider the context of Revelation chapter 13, of the state enforcing religious laws. In other words, his mindset is as such that it's okay for the state to dictate in terms of things of spiritual nature. He says the revival of blue laws and other measures to guard Sabbath rest is thus one more example of a prudent policy intervention to protect the subjectivity, the personhood of workers. So again, in other words, his whole point in writing this piece that he puts out, and these are his words, that that people, it's possible that they will stop, but it's not plausible. They need the state to speak up and to protect the rights of workers. Interesting. That said, I have looked then to see, well, what information is there in America for Sunday agitation and such, and the only law that I came across this year was in 2025-2026 session from the North Dakota chamber, and this was House Bill 1150, where they wanted to introduce Sunday morning closing laws for retail locations and such. And that passing that law did not pass. It ended up failing on their in-house legislature. Now, again, had that law passed, that would not have been, quote, a Sunday law. That would have been a local law dictating and impacting the people who are in, I think it was North Dakota was the area where that was. So again, not a national law, but a local law in the area that they were in. Now, looks like, let me change this. So what about the most recent developments? That we're able to see. This is from the BRI, Biblical Research Institute. I've shared before. Their work is to monitor claims or attempts then to be able to enforce religious laws. And their review, and this is from some years ago now, this is maybe as much as 10 years ago, of again documenting and finding out, was there any evidence of an impending Sunday legislation as such? And the answer was no. Now, of course, that will change in time. This is now May 4th, 2026. This is from the White House, and the section, of course, is the Jewish American Heritage Month 2026. Notice what President Trump writes. He says, throughout this historic year, and this year, of course, is 2026, which is the 250th anniversary of 1776. Okay, this is what his point of view is. He says, we rejoice in the triumph of the American spirit and rededicate ourselves to the cause of liberty and justice for all. In special honor of 250 glorious years of American independence, and on the weekend of Rededicate 250, a national jubilee of prayer, praise, and thanksgiving. Jewish Americans are encouraged to observe a national Sabbath. And now this has gotten some people in arms because they're saying, look, here you have the President of the United States encouraging Christians to enjoy a national Sabbath. Now, again, the backdrop is the 250-year celebration of American independence from Britain. And the emphasis is upon Jewish Americans and a national Sabbath. Now, so listen, he says, now, from sundown on May 15th to nightfall on May 16th, which is today, friends, families, and communities of all backgrounds may come together in gratitude for our great nation. This day will recognize the sacred Jewish tradition of setting time aside for rest, reflection, and gratitude to the Almighty. So what is he doing? He's saying, he's encouraging, of course, Jewish American in the practice then of coming for this month to set aside time on Sabbath. Now that again is not a, quote, Sunday law. It is interesting though that he coins it then in the Jewish tradition of keeping again Sabbath. Now, it goes on further to say, now therefore I, Donald J. Trump, President of the U.S., by virtue of authority vested in me by the Constitution of the laws of the United States, do hereby proclaim May 2026 as Jewish American Heritage Month. I call upon Americans to celebrate the heritage and contributions of Jewish Americans and to observe this month with appropriate programs, activities, and ceremonies. I further call on all Americans to celebrate their faith and freedom throughout this year during this month, and especially on Shabbat to celebrate our 250th year. Okay, now he's talking about Shabbat. He's not talking about Sunday. He's talking about sundown, Friday evening to Saturday evening. And in particular, he's also talking about from the perspective of a special emphasis on sundown May 15th to sundown May 16th. Let it not be lost that his son-in-law is Jewish. And so then and his daughter practices, quote, observing Sabbath. Well, why do I bring this out? I bring it out from the perspective of The previous presidents have also honored Jewish tradition and their legacies and such. And yet this is the first one that has come forth and said, it would be good to honor the Jewish Sabbath. Now that doesn't mean people are going to start keeping Saturday as Sabbath, so please don't misunderstand. The point I'm simply making is that he has apparently not much discernment in terms of like church and state, that it's okay for that. Now, even in making this decree and saying that it's okay to be able to encouraging people to worship on Sabbath, and even if he said worshiping on Sunday, that still would not be wrong. It's okay to encourage people in faith and prayer. What becomes an issue is when you mandate it, right? When it becomes an issue when you prescribe it, or becomes an issue of those issues. Now let's look at this in the context again of Scripture and inspiration. It says that the people of the United States have been a favorite people. But when they restrict religious liberty, now please notice who is doing the impact here. Now the people of the United States are the ones who are doing this, the advocates of it. So it's not be something that is brought about by hijacking, but it will be the people of the United States who will be at the forefront, who are requesting then a change. The people of the U.S. have been a favorite people. But when they restrict religious liberty, surrender Protestantism, and give countenance to popery, the measure of their guilt will be filled, and national apostasy will be registered in the books of heaven. Please notice that there are three things that happen simultaneously. Religious liberty is restricted. The principles of Protestantism are surrendered. And the countenance given to popery in deference to Sunday sacredness. When those three things are done, then national apostasy will be followed by national ruin. On Volume 5 of the Testimonies, page 451, it reads this way. It says that by the decree enforcing the institution of the papacy in violation of the law of God, our nation will fully disconnect herself from righteousness. Notice now, it says that when Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power. So it is Protestantism that we're more concerned about. Now, people have the emphasis on, well, let's see what the Vatican is doing. Let's see what this organization is doing. No. It is Protestantism that is in the forefront. They're the ones who are making the overtures. Look at this. It says that when Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power. So it's not vice versa. It is not Romanism stretching forth its hands to grasp the hand of Protestantism. Rather, it's Protestantism that is reaching over to grasp the hands of Romanism. When under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government, and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan, and that the end is near. So, beloved, then we have from here, in reference to Revelation chapter 13, really like a culmination of events. All right? So it's not one thing happening in isolation, but multiple things, layers happening over. Again, Protestantism, apostate Protestantism, reaching over to be able to clasp the hands of the Roman power. And in doing so, legislating that we must honor and exalt Sunday above every other day. And to not adhere to this, then, would bring fines or punishment or imprisonment and so forth. Then you will know that national apostasy will follow national ruin. Then you will know that America has formed an image to the Roman beast. So everything that happens prior to that is noise, it's chatter, but when it reaches over and says that we have passed legislation then, national legislation, that we will honor Sunday as being a day of sacredness, then you will know that this threefold union has been secured. And that threefold union, again, is apostate Protestantism, Romanism, and Spiritism. And Spiritism anchoring, pulling all those things in together for the spirits of devils seek to go out and to persuade or to dissuade people to be able to follow in on lying wonders. On page 452, it concludes, it says, the Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. And again, I just want to highlight and emphasize here, this does not mean covert meetings taking place at 2 or 3 in the morning. It is simply using as a metaphor what we call light and darkness. The Bible is replete in using examples of light and darkness. It says, you are the children of the light. You walk in the light and the world walks in darkness. They are stumbling and they know not what they stumble at. Now that does not mean that literally there's like light shining around you as you walk around and no one else has this light. But it means that the light of God's word, it fills your life and my life. The light of his presence gives us comfort. And so when we're walking in this world of miasma, spiritual darkness, that again, you look out and you don't see it, but then you look out through the spiritual light, you can see the strife that is there. And it is spiritual light that guards us, spiritual light that keeps us. Because without light, nothing can survive. Nothing is able to live to its fullness. And so the light of his presence we're walking in. And so it's in that metaphor that it says that the Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness, or meaning the true purposes are like spiritually concealed. It says that the leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in the movement do not themselves see where the undercurrent is tending. Now, of course, this is in the 1800s. It's not talking about today. So please make that distinction. It was written in the 1800s about the circumstances happening then. And even then, it was not a secretive meeting that was held like by Oppius Dei, or by like the Rothschilds or the Bilderbergers and like a secret group somewhere. No, it was a very public thing that was known, but the emphasis of the laws making its way in darkness is that the full impact was not spiritually seen. So like you might see someone and it's like, I'm going to go out and get wasted tonight. I'm just going to get drunk and just have a wonderful time. And they can see that they're going to go out and get drunk. They know that they're about to go out and get drunk and wasted. But if you have spiritual discernment and even common sense, you say, well, you know what, that's probably not going to end well. I see that going wrong 1,000 different ways. All right, I see this person, best case scenario, getting arrested for drunk driving and they haven't hurt anyone. Worst case scenario, I see them wrecking their car and harming themselves or someone else. And they can't see that even though you might present it to them. They think, well, it's okay. And you might say, well, that you need spiritual discernment to understand this. That, beloved, is the same piece here again. This is not a push of secret organizations. Rather, it is simply people don't understand what they're dealing with. They think, yeah, will be a good thing for the communal observance and uplifting. This will help people to stop debauchery. This will help some of the issues that are taking place. This will be a good plug-in, but they do not know where it is drifting or tending to them. Like you sit down, you play like a hand of cards, and you win gambling, and now you have the appetite to keep on gambling. You don't see, okay, I'm setting myself up to lose everything I have while thinking I'm about to win and make it big. Its professions are mild and apparently Christian, but when it shall speak, it will reveal the spirit of the dragon. Why does it reveal the spirit of the dragon? Because it says that if you do not worship as I say worship, then you will be punished. That is the spirit and the voice of the dragon. It is our duty to do all in our power to avert the threat and danger. We should endeavor to disarm the prejudice of people by putting ourselves in a proper light before the people. So let's put ourselves as positively before the people. Not as bandwagoners of various conspiracies and ideologies or fanatical or extreme, but put ourselves in the right place before the people to disarm their prejudices. We should bring before them the real question at issue, thus interposing the most effectual protest against measures to restrict liberty of conscience. We should search the scriptures and be able to give the reason for our faith. Says the prophet, the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Why do the wicked not understand? Because the wicked are groping in darkness. Why do the wise understand? Because the wise have their eyes open or illuminated, and they're seeing with light. I just say, this is not a good idea. 1888 materials, page 959. In closing, it says, the times and the seasons God has put in his own power. And why is God not giving us a knowledge of this? Because we would not make a right use of it if he did. A condition of things will result from this knowledge among our people that will greatly retard the work of God in preparing the people to stand in the great day that is to come. We are not to live upon time excitement. And now this is emphasizing time, but I'd also think it would be safe to say not to leave off of like any type of, quote, excitement in terms of like jumping to one piece or another. I hear people all the time and say, well, it wouldn't surprise me if Sunday laws would pass this year. Wouldn't surprise Sunday law will be passed next year. And they've been saying this like for 20 years. And if you keep saying the same thing over and over and over and over again, it will become like, who is it? The boy that cried wolf. So then when something that is of significance is really occurring, people are like, I heard that before. You've been saying that for 20 years and so forth. And the evidences that have been presented that people are bringing are invalid evidences to be able to be brought. Again, a piece here or there out of context, generally speaking. We are not to be engrossed with speculations in regard to the times and the seasons which God has not revealed. Jesus has told his disciples to watch, but not for definite time. His followers are to be in the position of those who are listening for the orders of their captain. They are to watch, wait, pray, and work as they approach the time for the coming of their Lord. But no one will be able to predict just when that time will come. And now today people are saying, well, I'm not predicting that it'll come by this date, but I believe that the Lord is going to come by 2030. Well, you just predicted a date. I can't predict it, but I think it's going to happen in the next couple of months, but I think the Lord will come by 2028. All right, well, you just predicted a date. No man will be able to predict a date for the day and hour in which he will come, knoweth no man, no, not the angels, but my Father in heaven. You will not be able to say that he will come in 1, 2, or 5 years. Neither are you to put off his coming by stating that it may not be for 10 or 20 years. In short, we're not to know when he is to come. But what does he want us to do? He just wants us to be ready. Review and Herald, December 11th, 1888, it is our duty to do all in our power to avert the threatened danger. A vast responsibility is devolving upon men and women of prayer throughout the land to petition that God might sweep back this cloud of evil and give a few more years of grace to work for the Master. Again, that was 1888. The context was that they were on the precipice of a law, the Blair Bill, that was being presented in committee, that had the potential of being all that Revelation underpinned. So we ought to be wise and to look again for those various things. And if we see them, I think this will be applicable prayer for us then, in that moment, in that season, that God might spare, that he might give a little time, that he would hold back then the cloud of evil and give a few more years of grace to work for the Master. Father in heaven, we know not the day or the hour, but we just want to pray that you would help us to be ready. Help us not live off of excitement that is falsely fueled, but to live off the true excitement and the reality that you will come and that you are to return to this earth and that we can be able to meet you in peace. I thank you for the word that you've given to us that will lead us and guide us. I ask that we may become more comfortable and familiar with that word and that we open up our lives to surrender to it and to your teachings and to its teachings. Forgive us of all of our sins. Once more I pray. Bless us and keep us. Again, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.